Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Torah Institute Parashat class. I am Gedalia Meyer, again podcasting from my home in Ma'ale Adumim. I am pleased to say that the restrictions on movement in general in Israel are gradually being reduced, and that by next week they expect a good deal of the population to be back at work. It remains to be seen, of course, if this is truly a wise move, but I believe pretty much everyone is relieved by the lifting of restrictions, and we're certainly hoping for an end to this pandemic, both in Israel and the world. This week, like last week, has a double parsha. The first is called Acharei Mot, while the second is called Mot-Kedoshim. The first means after the death, an ominous title which refers to the commandments given in the aftermath of the tragic deaths of two of the sons of Aaron, who was the high priest. These commandments deal with the temple procedures on the day of Yom Kippur. The second parsha means holy, a rather biblical title that is a general indication of the attitude and moral behavior expected of the Israelites. This particular parsha is loaded with an assortment of miscellaneous commandments in a seemingly random order. Most themes don't seem to have all that much to do with being holy. But then again, the word holy means different things to different people. Among this long list of commandments is one that is probably the most famous in the entire Torah. In fact, it stands in consideration of being the most famous statement ever made. Tacked in at the end of a series of commandments, in the middle of a verse, is the phrase, "And you shall love your neighbor as yourself." I believe that everyone will admit that this is about as foundational a statement as they come. In a sense, could be called the fundamental commandment of humanity. It is a reasonable bet that all societies that aspire to be moral have some version of this phrase. It just about says it all when it comes to interpersonal relations and what lofty goals we should be shooting for in our dealings with other people. What more is there to say? Well, it turns out that there's a great deal more that has been said about this commandment. Among other things, it became the basis of the so-called golden rule of the New Testament, which represents the foundations of Christian morality. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. This showstopper, in turn, probably came from a slightly earlier statement by the famous Rabbi Hillel, who lived around 2,050 years ago. His parallel statement, which is sometimes called the silver rule, reads, "Do not do unto others what you despise." He gave this as an answer to a question by a potential convert as to what constitutes the essence of the Torah. Between the two of these rules, we have the positive and negative versions of what could be called the simplest and most all-encompassing guide to human morality. It doesn't get any more straightforward than this. If you truly wish to be a moral and ethical person, consider what you want others to do and not to do to you, and let that serve as your barometer for life. Of course, things are not this simple. Every person is different, and what one person wants or doesn't want done to them is not necessarily the same as what another person wants. Furthermore, people change in the course of their lives, and societies change. So this rule is by no means hard and fast. It is almost impossible to quantify it in any way, or to write down a list of do's and don'ts that would somehow serve as a practical application of this rule. At best, it serves as an ideal that we can all aspire towards in some way, like an elusive and hazy goal that we set our sights on as we go through life. It turns out that there is a fascinating discussion on the importance of this commandment that is found in one of the collections of ancient Jewish rabbinic teachings known as Midrash. The first teaching found in this particular section is attributed to the famous Rabbi Akiva, the first and second century teacher and martyr who has come to represent the best and deepest of rabbinic Judaism. His long life ended during the Hadrianic persecutions of around the year 135 of the Common Era, following an aborted and unsuccessful attempt at throwing off Roman rule from Israel and rebuilding the destroyed temple in Jerusalem. Rabbi Akiva was executed by flaying of his skin. As he died, he uttered the declaration of the oneness of God. This midrashic teaching has him saying that the statement of, quote, you shall love your neighbor as yourself, is the great principle of the Torah. In all likelihood, he was mirroring the earlier teaching of Hillel, of whose school he was a direct disciple. He was elevating this commandment to the official status of the most important. This was not meant to diminish the importance of the others, but to raise this to the exalted status of the great principle. It is hard to imagine any other contenders for this lofty status. It turns out, however, that this very teaching from this midrash, there is another contender. This unlikely claim is made by a contemporary of Rabbi Akiva, the enigmatic Shimon ben Zoma. His alternative is a verse found towards the beginning of Genesis. Here's the quote: "This is the book of the history of man," or of Adam. "On the day that God created man, he made him in the likeness of God." While there is no doubt that this is a far-reaching and dramatic verse, it is not easy to understand how it can compete with Rabbi Akiva's verse as to being the great principle of the Torah. In fact, it is not easy to understand how it is a principle at all. It appears to be nothing more than a statement interjected to explain the lineage of the early figures of the Bible. It seems to be a brief restatement of the story of Adam and Eve, which is indeed what immediately follows this verse. So why did Ben Zoma think this verse was so important, even more so than love your neighbor as yourself? Well, there's a brief explanation given in that midrash, which seemingly clears everything up. What, Ben Zoma asks, would be the case of one who doesn't think too much of himself or herself? Would they be doing anything wrong if they treated others as they expected themselves to be treated? If they considered themselves to be cursed or worthless, could they deal with others in the same way? To answer this question, which he considers to be a shortcoming of Rabbi Akiva's verse, he uses his own verse. It is the second part of his verse that he finds his gem. He made him in the likeness of God. In this follow-up statement, he finds the answer to his question. No matter what a person may think of themselves, every person is made in the likeness of God. It makes no difference what either person's capabilities or self-image or qualities may be. Everyone is created in God's likeness. We must treat every human being as what they truly are, a human and mortal version of the divine. While this may seem to be a tall order, there is no denying that the Bible states this explicitly. Shimon ben Zoma was simply taking this explicit statement of the Bible and transforming it into a great principle. In all your interactions with other people, never forget that whoever you are dealing with is in some way made in the image and likeness of God. This lofty status, of course, applies to none other to ourselves. We cannot leave ourselves out of that glorious realization, no matter how much we may despise ourselves at any given time or situation. This is something that we frequently forget, either deliberately or inadvertently, as we go through the trials and tribulations of life. How often do we get down on ourselves over the most trivial of things, hating ourselves to no end and wishing that we were anybody but who we are? To realize that we are also created in the image and likeness of God is to realize that we are truly wonderful in spite of what we may have done and are worthy of being considered akin to God in some way. No matter what we may think or feel, we have a soul that is like a little piece of God within us, and that soul is really who we are. Perhaps more difficult even than this is to apply that status to others, especially those whom we truly despise. Who wants to consider any of those jerks to be created in the likeness of God? If anything, making this comparison will more likely lower our esteem of God than raise our esteem of any of those lowlifes. But this is where this statement truly works its magic, in the way that Ben Zoma is using it. This is the history of man. On the day that God created man, in the image of God, he made him. This is the history of man, of every human being who has ever lived, good or evil, smart or stupid, beautiful or ugly. They are all, every last one of them, created in the likeness of God. The Torah is making this statement, not because there happen to be a select few who have risen up to a level worthy of being compared to God, but because there are so many others who don't come within a light year of reaching that level. Those people also, warts and all, are created in the likeness of God. It may be difficult to see at times, and we may not really want to see it at times, but it is nevertheless true. We live in turbulent times. It is quite likely that the world as a whole has not seen such turbulence since the Second World War. Individuals, of course, and even nations as a whole have faced more trying times since then, but the human race probably has not. It is in such times that that the most trying moments arise, moments when we are likely to see the best and worst in people. It is all too tempting to condemn others for their callous or inconsiderate actions or words that strike us as the epitome of insensitive or even evil. This is quite natural. But it is times such as these that call for every one of us to rise above our natural, emotional, or spiritual limitations and see ourselves and others for what we truly are, creations of God who in some way resemble God. These two statements, love your neighbor as yourself, and he made him in the likeness of God, can serve as parallel guides through the storms of times such as these, and even for when things calm down and get back to normal. We know how we wish to be treated, so why can't we get the ball rolling by treating others in that way? Even if we don't expect much out of anyone else, we can still recognize what it is that they truly are. To look upon the face of another person and to realize that they are truly created in God's image is to live in a kind of heaven. To love others as we love ourselves is to live on earth in the greatest way possible. We can have heaven on earth if we just make it be. Shabbat shalom.